Hey, hey! Woohoo! All right, that worked. Excellent. Sold out crowd. Welcome back, everybody. This is really, really great to have so many of you here today. Friends, old students, new faculty, old faculty. It really feels great. This is the opening lecture of the 25-26 academic year. And tonight it is my truly great pleasure to introduce architect Jeanne Gang, who is this semester's Paul Rudolph Lecturer at the School of Architecture. The Paul Rudolph Lectureship Endowment was created in 1986 by Claire and Moritz Edersheim to honor Rudolph, the architect of this building and the chair of architecture at Yale from 1958 to 1965. Rudolph himself gave the first lecture, some indication of his personality, I believe, and subsequent others in the list of more than 40 architects over the years have included Charles Gwathmey, Shigeru Ban, Kazuo Sejima, Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown, Stanley Tigerman, a fellow Chicagoan, and Jeanne Gang herself 10 years ago in 2015. So it's really great to have you back at Yale, Jeanne, and thank you very much for joining us on the Thursday before Labor Day weekend. Jeanne Gang's firm, founded and based in Chicago with offices in New York, San Francisco, and Paris, is known as Studio Gang. They do work across almost all aspects of the built environment, including civic, cultural, educational, commercial, and multi-unit residential buildings, along with planning. I'm hoping we get to see some of their most recent projects tonight. I think it's important to mention, particularly to you students, that Studio Gang does research in support of public awareness and architecture through the built environment. And that work champions innovative design strategies, biodiversity in cities, and gender equity in the practice of architecture and all the related professions. Prior to founding Studio Gang in 1997, Jeanne worked at OMA in Rotterdam and Booth Hansen in Chicago. She is also a professor in practice at the GSD at Harvard, although I have tried to convince her to come here, which is also where she received her Master of Architecture degree. She did undergraduate studies at the University of Illinois, and she has taught as a visiting professor at Columbia, Rice, Princeton, and a while ago at Yale. She is a fellow of the AIA, an honorary fellow of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and an international fellow of the RIBA. She has received numerous awards and honors, way too many to recite tonight, but among them, she was a MacArthur Fellow. She received the Academy's Award in Architecture from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. She received the Jesse Rosenberger Medal from the University of Chicago, and she was one of 5 recipients in the inaugural year of the Architectural Record Women in Architecture Awards. In 2016, Gang was named Architect of the Year by the Architectural Review. She has also received the Louis Kahn Memorial Award of the Philadelphia Center for Architecture and was the first woman to receive the Charlotte Perriand Award, which recognizes architects whose work enhances the quality of life through design. Tonight, she will be giving a lecture entitled The Art of Architectural Grafting, and showing what a true friend I am, here's a little plug for her book. So please give a very warm welcome to Jeanne Gang.
All right. Thank you so much, Deborah, for this nice invitation and to kick off the school year. It's always great to see what's going on at Yale, even if it is the first day of school. And it's also nice to be back on this paprika carpet with a paprika sweater on at the same time. So I thought I would, tonight we're going to be talking about the art of architectural grafting, but I want to first give a little background about the firm and just kind of how we got to that point. It's interesting to think about what's important for us to be talking about in schools right now, but in such a rapidly changing environment. I do that a lot with my teams, just a little introduction to the teams, about 140 people based in these different cities, but it truly is something where we're thinking globally but acting locally. So each of the firms has people from the city and region, and we try to share knowledge across those offices. The founding of the firm, this is where we've been hailing from at the headquarters, I guess you would call it, since about 2015, and it's a 1937 building, so it's kind of represents what we're going to be speaking about today. It used to be a bank, and then we've converted it to our offices. So I think architecture oftentimes it represents, of course, the societal values, but it also represents our own values as authors, you as authors, we as authors. And so we need to also find our voice within that. And so our building, we use the rooftop as an experimental a roof where we are working on bringing more biodiverse nature into the city and recording it, and using it to manifest our ideas about reuse and biodiversity and the city fighting against climate change, which is one of the biggest issues of our time. I think one's work also has to do with the place where you began. And so in Chicago, it's this incredible layers of both natural systems, like as in being on this migratory flyway, the Mississippi flyway, overlaid with these remnants of industrial production that you see on the map here on the south side of Chicago. And these are kind of some of the earliest things that we worked with in our projects and still remain very interesting touchstones for us at the studio. I've been a lifelong observer of nature, and I guess I learn from nature, the invention, the strategies that nature has, the beauty, I guess, all of those things come together and inform our work. So in the early days, maybe one of projects that we worked on a lot of community centers, we worked in the south side of Chicago looking at, how materials could be reused. Materials from industrial production could be reused to make buildings, and also tapping into human behavior, which is also nature, how this group of people really felt they wanted to establish a new identity after the steel production left, and they were left with this incredible network of wetlands and wildlife areas overlaid with industry. So, moving ahead, we've worked with a lot of different communities in the city, and I think what we learned about that was just that human behavior, human desire to have community, to be strong, to make architecture that's relevant for communities is the way that we really got started, very humble buildings. And then we've used that knowledge in almost all building types going forward. So even in tall buildings, there's always some kind of inspiration from the place, like on the left, these limestone outcrops that are produced formally interesting, made by weather, water, time, wind, adding to a community of the city, but also realizing that each building in itself, even if it's not a community center, has a community aspect. In the Aqua Tower, which was one of our early ones, it was really about letting people see each other, and in doing so, maybe they could get together. But also just, this was one of the first tall buildings, I think, that embraced balconies as a feature, as a thing for people to have, for them to be able to step outside and be part of the overall cityscape at the same time. So how do we address climate change? And mainly we'll be talking about reuse, but that's not only applying to buildings, it also applies to urban spaces that we find. And so just an example of boosting biodiversity in the city is a project called the Nature Boardwalk at Lincoln Park Zoo, which is a neighborhood also and a community center. But it's a kind of collapse, or let's see, it's an exaggeration, I guess, of nature in the city. This is really part of a zoo with no cages. We really wanted the animals and the people to mix without, just by inviting, by having the right habitats, people will come. So starting out, we have a pond, a remnant of the 19th century, where water is thought of as more of an aesthetic introduction of aesthetics into the city, reflections. And when we came into this project, the zoo had already, it was a bit run down. And the project ended up being about, making a place, instead of repairing the edges of this pond, really ripping them out and creating a deeper pond that could support life. And so in this project, over time, we've seen a real increase in the amount of biodiversity it has. And these are, like on the left, just documenting the different types of turtles and tortoises that are in the pond, but also it's become a hot spot for eBird and birding throughout the region. And because of this project, which I should say they really only asked us to design a pavilion, but we went all the way with this pond. Because of the project, there's a whole new institution that formed to study urban wildlife, and it's called the Urban Wildlife Institute, who we at Studio Gang still work with today on various projects. Wood as a material was very important to us, to do something that was renewable, and to create urban space. It's like a new overlay on this 19th century urban space that provides new opportunities for using it, for connecting to people. And of course, we did design a pavilion with these bent wood lamellas that houses a lot of different things that we never expected. Mainly, it's a place to get engaged or get married, but mostly for architects. But it also serves as like unintended uses, unexpected uses, like people coming there for the dîner en blanc, which is just a very impromptu dinner where you bring a picnic and dress in white, and this whole boardwalk was taken over by them. So that's one approach to what's happening to our climate that we're really committed to. Another is really using bio-based materials. So in our region, of course, this is mostly wood, but it's interesting to think about wood not just in CLTs, but in many different ways that it can be used. So for the Arcus Center for Social Justice Leadership, for example, we've discovered this kind of vernacular, age-old way of using wood, almost like in a masonry wall, using log ends, which are about 18 inches deep, and building a wall with those. So to do this and bringing it into the 21st century, we had to search out people that knew how to do it. It happened to be a really cool hippie couple that was building saunas at the time for people, and the research that went into just being able to use this for an institutional building was incredible. But a lot of it is building it, testing it by hand. These are some of the walls that we built with them, and then we invited the masons to do it. Of course, they did it a million times better than any of us, and they just took right to it. So the result is this incredible, almost like a living wall that's sequestering the carbon within the wood. The wood actually is the carbon, in fact. So it's a great way to reduce embodied carbon in this type of building. So inside it's very light and really feels modern, contemporary, but outside it can also have this aging appearance, this response to the environment, and be a long-lasting building. So the way I started to first think about grafting goes back to 2012 with this project, the Prentice Hospital. And it isn't really a project. We were never given the commission to do this project. But sometimes as an architect, you just have to do things that you want to do, and you don't have to have a client. So that's the example of this. So it dawned on me that, we were trying to reuse materials, and it was very hard, like in that Ford Calumet project. It's very hard to get materials that have already been used for one thing and reuse it in a building, because you have to have those things tested. You don't know what's available. And so there's ways to do it, but it's a chore. But buildings are already there, so they should be easier to reuse. This building, designed by Bertrand Goldberg in 1975, was a really cool looking hospital in Chicago, and with these oval windows. And this design of it is kind of this clover leaf. And it was going to be torn down. And it just seemed like such a waste, because it would just be the coolest building, and it could be anything. So what we did was show not preservation, but adaptation into something else that would allow the university that owned it to get more square footage above it. So it's kind of like ends up being this 3-tiered thing: the lower level, which is this dark glass, the cloverleaf design, and then a tower above. And we did this in order to show this third way. It was possible to show that, technically possible, because Bertrand Goldberg, when he designed the building, he did not put a core down the middle of the building. And that's because it was a hospital, and he believed that the nursing staff should be able to see all of the rooms, the patient rooms. So the nurses' desks was in the middle. But what this did was actually make it possible to imagine dropping a core down the center of this thing. Yes, that's why it's not preservation, because it's like not really in keeping with this original use, but it would be a way of adding capacity to the site and keeping the remnant of the Bertrand Goldberg building that so many architects like me loved. But anyway, they got it down, and they built a glass, building over there. However, it did start me thinking more seriously about what reuse is. And this is a graph. It didn't shift. Let's see. Go there. There. This is a graph that it shows, that's from the EU, that has measured all these different strategies in which strategy saves the most embodied carbon. So number one is delaying demolition. The reason why embodied carbon is so important is because we have to save the emissions now. Something like design for disassembly, it might save carbon, but it's not going to save the carbon until that next building is going to come there and it gets disassembled. So this is about the emergency of saving carbon right now. So delaying building. But the second best one is increasing the intensity of use. So in other words, not just reuse, but like amplified reuse, making buildings work 24/7, making buildings that have more square footage on them, that making buildings have more uses. And so this led to eventually this book, which talks about the art of architectural grafting. And why grafting, why horticulture as an inspiration. So it is an incredible thing. I've always been interested in plants, but but grafting has been around for so long. It's an ancient technique where there's a rootstock and you add onto it this scion, which is bringing new qualities to the plant. So it's not about creating, it's not about sexual reproduction. It's making the two plants work together as one, but they stay independent plants, which is really interesting, which made me think of, how we as architects might add on to buildings. And plants are so amazing in many other ways as well. But in the research for the book, I went to a lot of, really interesting libraries around the world, and especially in the Northeast here at Harvard and at New York Botanical Gardens. And you find this evidence going either like way back, but also in different countries. So it's just been going on for a long time. And if you think about how prevalent grafting is, if any apple you eat today is a product of grafting. So it's done so that we can have those, same taste in the same apple. Otherwise, it would be different, every time you have a new tree. So it's done consistently to bring tastier fruit, more beautiful fruit, or various things like that. So that also is inspiring. There's an artist group called the Guerrilla Grafters in San Francisco, and they go around and they graft onto street trees, which I don't know if you knew this, but street trees are bred so that they don't have any fruit, just because it's like too messy or something. So they're just trying to call attention to food insecurity. And so it's an art practice that really uses grafting as a it's illegal to do it. So that's why it's guerrilla. But it's really interesting. And today, there's a lot more ways to study what's actually happening in a graft. It's really a response to a wound. And so if you think about a plant, it could be weakened by a graft. So the wound thickens it around there and makes it stronger at the connection. So this is the kind of stuff that was inspiring me to do a couple studios on grafting. We actually have done grafting in these studios with plants. And it's interesting to see the other aspect of it, which is like the care that it takes to actually get the plant to survive and live. It's not that easy. So it's very interesting to see which students care for their plant and which students just kind of put it on the desk and let it die. So, but what is architectural grafting is really kind of, I'm trying to evoke a philosophy that would be about, upcycling buildings, making them have more capacity, taking old structures, which would be the root stock, and bringing new life to them that brings an advantage to both, so to create a new distinctive type of architecture. And in the book, I would trying to just put out some rules. They are to be, added to or shot down, but just like some qualities of what good grafting is. You can't just graft anything to anything, and just get there was a lot of fear about grafting in the past because people thought it was impure, but you do have to find things that are compatible in order for it to work. So that's also interesting. Just to tectonically, let's talk about that for a second. There's a physical connection that has to be made. And so I was experimenting with just kind of this very banal building that we were given a project to do. and there were like 6 of these buildings on this campus. And they wanted to turn this one into a lab, but it was kind of just a storage building. So, you really have to start out assessing what you have. Start with what's there. Really understand what things can be reused. Most of the carbon, of course, is in the structure. So oftentimes you can just pull something back to the structure and you're still saving a lot of carbon and just use that as a starting point. So you do have to kind of quantify and assess what will be reused. In this particular thing, we were turning it into a lab and we needed a higher ceiling and for all of the exhaust, but also to bring some natural light in. So working on this idea of the saddle graft, which is where you cut the living plant almost like a clothespin, and you you put them together like that. So that was our concept of this, how to add on to this structure, this anonymous structure. And so basically starting with this existing columns and beams that were there and kind of bridging up with the saddle and building onto it with wood, which also has the lower carbon, and creating an assembly that can then help create this new plane, higher plane of the building, and then make it possible for this higher and better use, upcycling it. So these beams are cantilevered off the existing, we called it like a beamlet, cantilevered off the column lines and the beams. And so together it ends up being this interesting connection and stabilized, through the saddle graft. And then inside it would look like this. You get a much higher ceiling, and outside a new aesthetic. It doesn't look like the old one, but it is based on it, and so it's somehow connected to it, and creates a new piece of architecture. Another category we had been working on is post-industrial, reusing big old industrial buildings, and bringing them back into the urban environment. So at Beloit College, we had the chance to work with an old, formerly coal-burning power plant that is positioned right in between the town and Gown. I think I have to click this to get it going. So it's a big, it was a powerhouse that was built over the years in different stages, and then we connected it via this bridge to the campus, making it almost like this accessibility machine to bring people down to the riverfront. So inside you have this old boiler room and turbine hall it's like a building that is so much bigger than you would ever be able to build, from scratch. So it has all these great qualities, and we put into it classrooms and recreational spaces like this new practice area, a track that pokes into that, and a pool. So they got like 3 buildings in one. They got a rec center, health center, and a student union. But at the same time, it really activates this river edge that if it were not reused, it would be this big derelict thing sitting there. So it really helped to graft something into the city that joins all the spaces along the river and the kind of town and gown of the city. Museums are interesting, and I'm going to show you a couple examples of these very complex museums. This happens a lot where museums add on to, over time, so many parts and pieces. And so we won this project to redo the Arkansas Museum of Fine Art in Little Rock, Arkansas. And it is a school of art. It had a theater in it. And they wanted more gallery space. So it's kind of a community center in a certain way in its own right. But when we came to this project, it looked like this. And I've seen this a bunch of times now, that a lot, like museums that have added on, without really thinking through, the next step of what someone else might have to do. So I think that's another thing that comes out of grafting, is you start to anticipate what is going to come next. And that's a different way for us architects to start thinking. So this building, had all these different parts, and the original building was here in the middle, 1937. They had just built right on the front of it, every possible shape, every possible material. There were something like 8 different structural systems, 8 different mechanical systems. The art path that was crossing over the public path often. And so sometimes it takes some scraping away or some editing. The point is you want to give more life. So just like grafting in plants, the goal is the life. So if it has to bust out of what was there, you have to do it. These are some drawings and models early on. It was not touching the park at all. This building was very interior, so we kind of created this central axis. I'll go back to that and broke out into the park in the front and the park in the south on these two places to create a new environment and to give new life to the place. At the same time, restoring and scraping away the buildings that were glommed onto the original front building and bringing that in to become the entry once again. And so here is the back where it just blossoms out into the park and creates a lot more types of uses and engages with the park. There's a little bit of a transformation you can see with those. This building was completed like right as it went on construction all the way through COVID and opened up afterwards. And it was just like people were so excited to go to a new place. This is the cultural living room, so it's a place for people to talk about what they've seen. They just didn't have the social spaces that they needed for people to like connect. There's the axis there where all of the different programs can now be connected through the blossom, as we called it, and a lot more sight lines between people and between people on the outside and people in the different programs. So in a way, it really is it's a community center. I think of it like that. And it's, again, this grafted element, but also we added on, to places where the structure could take it, and just bringing new capacity to the building. Some of the spaces inside, and that's it, again, with the river in the back. Okay, the second one that I wanted to show for this is the Gilder Center at the American Museum of Natural History, which is another story of a museum environment where lots of additions had happened. They have 26 buildings here at the museum, and you can see the outline on the left. That's the place where we chose to put the addition. I think there was a competition, and people put the new wing in lots of different places. We plugged it in there because it would give flow and life to the building. People also, this every building has 1 million stories, but this is really about like how can we. It's a perfect project to start to think about like what are we going to. Where are we going with science? How can we encourage science education, exploration, and new careers in science, and especially at a time when there's so much doubt about science. And so the museum's role is really pivotal in terms of like providing this education, not just for kids, but also the parents, and also it's a university. They actually grant PhDs at this museum. It's actually a university as well. So the green area is the area where we plugged into the building, kind of opening up new circulation paths and new flows for people. But what's really interesting about this building, again, 26 different buildings with lots of different styles of architecture, let's say. We were building, because of putting it here, it happened to be right on top of the loading dock and the loading zone for the entire museum. And they have I don't know if you've ever seen the big whale, and they have lots of big festivals, events, and galas, as well as big giant dinosaurs coming through these below. So you could only put columns down in certain areas. So that inspired this idea of like maybe making an inside architecture, something it's a solid and it is a structure. that would support the floors coming in, framing into it. So it's really, it's hard to describe this project. It is a structure inside that then supports the building all around it. And it was, because of these constraints, it really came to mind these landscapes of discovery, these places where, the material, the mass has been eroded or subtracted that have fewer, points to land. And so if you were to look at it as a drawing, this is the kernel of the project. This is the architecture. You'll never see that like that, but it's inside the building. This is some of the modeling. We had to come up with a lot of interesting ways of modeling this building. And a lot of the software that we tried to use was creating more too blobby of shapes and things like that. So it is also about the form. The creases were important. The aesthetics of it, as well as the technical side, were very important to get this discovery. And then it became, how do you build it? So on the left is an image of this tour that we did of the underground in Manhattan. And you can see it's almost like a cathedral under there with these vaults and stuff where the trains go through. And it's all made with shotcrete. So in other words, they put the rebar in, and then they have teams go through and shoot the concrete into the rebar, and then they scrape it into the rebar. So it's this interesting, for someone who loves making stuff, it's interesting to have a process that is both digital at the highest end of that technology, but also handmade in a certain way. And so it's really not like, the parametric things from the 2000s. It's really much more about the physical making of the space. The other interesting thing is you don't get to see what you did until the end, because the whole thing is full of scaffolding. And then, the only time we started to see it is when you start to pull it down, even though every inch was scanned with, to make sure the rebar's in the right place, but you're only seeing a little portion of it at a time. So it's very exciting to see this building, and also seeing it from the top down instead of the bottom up was a lot of interesting inversions there. But it creates a lot of exciting space, connections, portals to different parts that someone could discover, and brings some of the things that were behind closed doors out to the front, like their library, which is now much more connected to the outdoors, their collections core, and also brings living things into the museum, like the butterfly exhibit. There's insects, and like my favorite is really the leaf cutters, because I just love the way that they collaborate, I guess, to create a society. And it's so interesting to see the connection between the way they make their house with the way that this building was made. So when you get to the outside, how do you have this dialogue with the original buildings? And so getting back to grafting, it's not about mimicking something, but we are building right on the axis of the 95th Street axis through Manhattan. And on the opposite side of the axis is the Central Park West facade made of Milford pink granite. There's also many other materials, but we decided to associate our extension with that piece. So from the east and from the west, you have this Milford pink granite, and you have this kind of arched entryway. And so that's the outside of it, which is, it was shotcrete through and through, and then we have, because it's exterior, we have insulation and then granite, this granite cladding to connect it to the rest of the campus. Okay, all right. So last project, another aspect of grafting, I want to talk about asynchronous collaboration. So I think we're often taught that we are, the authors. If you're in school, it's like, what is your project about? And that's really important. But there could be a way of creating that is much more about this kind of co-authorship and making moves that are informed by the others. And then when it's working on something where someone's, already passed away or something, another architect, then you you have to kind of guess what they would have done. And that's what I do. I try to think of a dialogue with the last architect. And that is, it's just an interesting way that this grafting brought up, because with grafting in plants, you have to work with the qualities of the plant you have. You can't just, get rid of it. So you have to kind of go with it. So with this project, it's not all about reuse. There's new buildings here, but working with UC Santa Cruz, we were asked to come to this very well-known postmodern masterpiece, I would say, from Charles Moore. I would have never said that before I started working on this project, but once you start getting into it, I think it's another important point. You have to love the thing you're working on. So like a lot of times I have students that will draw the existing building and it's like one line around here and then here's all the detail is on their building. But you have to like really draw the existing building and love it before you move over to your own thing. So anyway, this was a very interesting project he did at University of California. They have a series of colleges, and he wanted to make this experience almost like a street from a hill town in Italy in a redwood forest. It was really interesting. It was done, and I think he was working on it in the 70s, but it was published in 1987. It kind of has this elbow-like plan. And here's some of the he called them trivial monuments, but he had these very quirky things that were, like a mayor's stand and a phone booth and the laundry and a piazzetta and lots of little things that were dotted through there to bring focus to the streetscape that he was creating. So all the inside of the buildings were white, and then the outside of, the whole environment facing the redwoods was like painted. It's all stucco, but it was painted like paprika kind of color. And so this is looking at the way it was when we first visited the site. So you had these housing with galleries that you would get to the different units. And so part of this was renovating these, which we worked with another architect to kind of figure out what to do with these, because they had mold and they were not, there's some things about it the students didn't like. So we had to improve and work on those, but we also had to add hundreds of beds to this to the site. So one thing about Charles Moore that I started to appreciate was that he was really into this engagement with the community where he was building. And this was a radio program that they did, or TV program, where they were people were sending in their ideas and they were writing them down. And so we like engagement, and that's part of our process in community centers, so we wanted to do something like that here. So these were our questions that we were going to ask about the project to the students and the faculty. To get people to come to the meetings, we made these quirky posters, because Kresge is all about the quirkiness. And then we had, sessions with the students and stuff. I mean, why is Kresge quirky? Well, it's a place where a lot of environmental studies happen, and the mascot for UC Santa Cruz is that yellow creature on the right. Does anyone know what it is? Yes, it's a banana slug made famous by this T-shirt, John Travolta. But so we met with the students. They're kind of reenacting and doing finding out what was wrong, adding these different. We ended up adding these noodle-shaped buildings, I guess they would call them, on the corner, macaroni. But they were preserving the families of redwoods, and then getting into like adding our own voice, which was really again based on what I observe in nature, which are these certain kind of mushrooms that were growing down the slope. So in our academic building, we took cues from that to kind of splay out these different wings on the academic building that was to go at the top of the hill. And all of this is, again, bio-based materials, all wood construction. I even used stucco, which I had never used before, but it was kind of fun because you can do curves very easily. But all of these connections to the redwood forest were amazing to do in these different classrooms and auditoria, as well as using the wood itself as the cladding material on the residence halls. I want to also mention, of course, I'm always trying to find ways to reduce mortality in birds with windows. And here we were able to use a frit that, if you can see, I don't know if you can see it, but it has all the different characters of the forest as the frit identity. So. And so it's pretty nice to have that. So just to wrap up, coming back to the Midwest, one of the things, again, trying to think of these things in terms of systems and not just objects. Like the Midwest, of course, is a post-industrial landscape. I'm passionate about this Great Lakes, but it's like 20% of all fresh water is found there. But it's also seriously polluted from that industrial era. And so as I started to work with thinking through how do we get this wood that we need, or biomaterials that we need to do grafting, but also to reduce carbon, I started thinking about, forests to replace this. And so that's like what I've been working on lately is partnering with different groups to think about installing forestry, but productive forestry in place of polluted landscapes. So working with the phytoremediation, this hybrid poplar has been shown to do a good job of pulling some of those hard chemicals out of there. And it also has been, like, I think Georgia Tech is experimenting with it used in CLTs. And so when you think about what could happen, if you look at this map, this is all of the forests that we use today for our domestic lumber, and forest is a very generic word for something that has so many different types and varieties. But if we think about replacing some of the polluted landscapes, these brownfields, with forests, you can imagine starting a whole new industry with jobs and livelihoods that would start to replace some of that industrial loss. And so with that, 45 minutes on the dot. Thank you very much.
We have time for a few questions, which Jeanne has very generously offered to take. So, hands, not students. We're starting with students.
Hi. Thank you for your lecture. I just want to ask you to further develop this difference between parametric architecture from the 2000s and this architecture, I don't know how to call it, maybe like biomimic or nature-inspired architecture that you're further developing now. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. The thing, I've never just wanted to stay completely in the computer, just because personally I like making, and all the team that we have likes to make things and appreciates like making, in the field. And so, as when you think about how much form work it would take to produce, to create all the variety we had at the American Museum of Natural History, it brings making into the question too, not just the production of the drawing itself or the 3D printing, let's say, of form work that you could have, but it brings this other kind of totally human aspect into the project, embedded in it. And I think that is interesting, especially because it's not 100% predictable, which I actually like. So I think there's also this engagement with the human, which I also like very much, which grafting is also very much connected with. You can do robotic grafting, and it is done, but when you try to do it, you find that the precision required, the patience and the care that it takes is elevated. So there's a kind of this care aspect, and frankly, the reward of the people that are making something in the field that really makes me excited. So it's a combination. It's like a kind of blending of this very technology. I mean, we had to write our own software with help of experts to get to the form we wanted, but then in thinking it all the way through to the making part, you have to accept, that there's like the imperfection of it somehow, that it makes it art to me. Yes.
This work also seems to be about grafting onto existing communities, and I was just curious about what that dialogue was like, and if there was any sort of like fruitful pushback or tension from communities that may have expanded the work in unexpected ways.
That's a great question. And the example of Charles Moore, engaging. I didn't even know that he had done that, but something that we try to do. It can never be perfect, but trying to get almost team members embedded into our teams from the communities where we work is one way to kind of be slightly better at putting a project in a community that you might not know. I felt more comfortable in Chicago doing community projects because I felt like I knew the communities, at least people within the communities. But then as you start to move outward, we recently did a project in Memphis and on their waterfront. It's called the Tom Lee Park, and to in a way feeling insecure about what is needed, we ended up bringing people into our team from Memphis, and especially youth who are just telling us what exactly they want to see on this park. And so you don't start with the top down, you start with people it doesn't mean you're erasing the designer or the design. It just means that you're engaging and kind of responding to a community and their desires. The design part is very much appreciated, I think, and needed throughout all the communities that we've worked with. I heard the comment that our community doesn't ever get something new, and when we get something new, there's so much pride in that, and that's really true. I don't think people just want to keep everything exactly the same as it was. They want something that they can see themselves in, though. So you have to try to find that way to allow that ownership.
Hi, thank you for the wonderful lecture. I saw that there were many examples that are using grafting shown at different scales. How could grafting be used to address the housing crisis?
Good, very good question. And housing is of course, this is when we talk about what should we be working on, and housing is right up there at the top. I think, adaptive reuse from other uses into housing is a great way to start to address that. And it's not just easy to do. It's not easy to turn a big office building into the scale you need for residential, but that might be one way to start thinking about it. What buildings that are underutilized could just be converted, and you would have a house in a lot less time than starting from scratch and getting all the permissions and things like that. One thing I had the students do, and we were looking a lot at concrete buildings, just because the buildings that are about the age of the Yale School of Art and Architecture are the ones that are kind of getting torn down right now. And there's a lot of reasons why people say that they do it, like it's not efficient, or it's going to cost more to reuse it, and same old excuses. But I don't think the whole costs are being thought through. I mean, there's a lot more costs than just the day $1 cost. So most buildings can be reused, and that's why I think the grafting thing it opens up possibilities. It's not preservation, although preservation does have a place, of course, and is important, but it opens up possibilities for a lot of maybe anonymous buildings, if there can be anonymous buildings, or just underappreciated buildings to become something new. Maybe housing is a great idea.
Hi. When it comes to architectural grafting, what criteria do you use to determine what parts of the architecture are worth saving and what parts of it are worth demolishing? And what limitations do you give yourself so that you can't basically change the whole structure throughout the design process? And do you use the structural stability of the particular building as a limitation for yourself on what you can design on it? Or do you design first and then work around that?
Yes, that's a great question, and that's your motto has to be start with what's there, and if the structure can take another floor, that's where you put the other floor, not in the place where you'd have to, you try to use as much as you can of what's there. So it does involve working with an engineer early on to analyze, the structure. And then that part, which I didn't really get to tonight, but, also when you do that addition, added capacity thing, what about the next person? It's forces you to start thinking differently, because you're thinking oh, this is just the interim. No architecture work is ever complete. So, I mean, this is very hard to hear, right? Because you think this is my design and there it is. But no, if you just start thinking of it in a continuum, maybe your design can help set up that next step too. Either where or adding, maybe you can't build 2 stories and you build one that can take another story, or at least the foundations can. Those are the things that will help to set up the co-authorship, if you will, for the next architect.
Thank you for your wonderful lecture. I'm curious what you think that the practice of grafting and adaptive reuse in general says about architecture as a whole, and if you think it, especially thinking towards the past, and oftentimes architecture was more of a putting forth a unified vision, whether it's the curtain wall or it's a type of column. What do you think that these practices of adaptive reuse say about architecture today? And do you think that's something coming from the profession or being received from, being demanded by the world and popular culture?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. It reminds me of that, in the U.S., we often, just like with sustainability, it's, you started out with trying to get the clients to do it. But then eventually they wanted it because they saw that there was a benefit. And with grafting and with reusing older structures, I'm sure you've seen this, Deborah, with the oftentimes that you've done it with buildings. There's always that scenario that they could start over from scratch. So you kind of have to find the qualities, find out what will convince them. The opposite is true in our practice in Europe, where it's you can't touch anything and add anything to it, or just this idea that there could be a new thing growing out of the building. That's just, no. So we have this, it's not something that's super accepted, I think, at all holistically, but I think it's something that we can present to our clients, like what are the benefits, or we can present to society, like look at how cool the buildings can be. And oftentimes, like the Arkansas Museum of Fine Arts, for example, you would never be able to recreate all of those things, the theater, the school, so you get more. Or with the Beloit College powerhouse, we would have had such a diminutive, if we started new, such a diminutive building with the same, budget. So there's many benefits that my goal of the book, though, was really to get us to, as architects, to start talking more about it in more specific terms, because I think like terms like just reuse, adaptive reuse and stuff, recycling, it's kind of boring, and you can't, so we need to turn it into more of an architecture dialogue, like what exactly are you doing to this building, in what way, and to make some parameters around the reciprocity, the compatibility, the added capacity, like has to kind of meet these different things, which is what I was trying to do, just to get the dialogue started more, because I think a lot of architects are doing this. They are doing this as part of the practice, but maybe don't have the right words for their client, or they're not thinking about it in these different terms. So it's trying to open up more opportunities for architects to build upon and to use, trying to be useful. Okay. Thank you.